practice and in-house roles. Mr. Chiedozie specializes in navigating evolving fintech regulation and commercial frameworks in emerging African markets. Now, in a nutshell, I think Mr. Chiedozie is practically just going to be telling us about commercial lawyers playbook, skills, mindset, and positioning in the industry. So thank you so much, Mr. Chiedozie. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you again. The pleasure is mine.
Yeah. So without wasting much time, I want to ask Mr. Chiedozie, where exactly are you now? How is the weather there?
I'm currently in the UK. Weather it's sunny out now, so it's closer to summer. So it's
you're not experiencing Nigerian heat.
I mean, for now, yeah.
I think Nigeria is closer to hellfire now, but then it's fine.
Shouldn't it be like closer to the rainy season soon? I think because I think the weather is erratic these days because of climate change. But yeah, anyway.
Okay. So generally, without wasting much time, I think our first question actually borders down on the term commercial lawyer, because what we do at Evolving Lawyer Series is mostly to get lawyers from in-house role come to talk about their experiences and every other thing that happened around that specific sector. You know, Nigeria is mostly leaning towards litigation and thereabout, and then there's a new clamor for in-house role and so on and so forth again. So my first question is with regards to the term commercial lawyer. What exactly do you do? What does the role involve actually your everyday work? Maybe you can take us through your everyday work process and how things are being done there.
I guess I would say to understand what who a commercial lawyer is to go back to the root cause, or the roots of the word, or the etymology of the word commerce, right? Which is essentially doing business, right? Buying and selling, providing goods and services as the case may be. Now, it then follows that a commercial lawyer is a lawyer that actually, practices law within the ambit of a business, right? And advises business stakeholders on how to actually, whether sell the goods or provide the services they're doing, right, in a manner that is compliant with the law, right? And two things then stand out, right? Now that we talk about, so we've sort of streamlined what a commercial lawyer would be doing, or rather what a commercial lawyer is, and, where that stems from in terms of commerce, right, would be contracts, right? And to an extent, compliance. Contracts, because contracts is the language of business, right? Businessmen want their relationships, governed by certainty and preciseness. And so you then have contracts. And the second thing is because businesses work within, or have to work most times within, a regulated environment, you need to provide advice, obviously, as a trained lawyer, on how those business stakeholders could actually provide their goods and services in a manner that is actually in accordance with the law. So a commercial lawyer, simply put, is a lawyer that actually advises businesses, right, on how they actually should, do their business. And this is in a very generic sense. There are, of course, niches and practice areas, etc., but I think this provides like a, robust overview of what a commercial lawyer is. In terms of what I do on a day-to-day, because I currently work in a business, my work is very, could be very random. While my practice area is debt, by that I mean advising my company on how to, leverage facilities in order to actually build a sustainable business. Just to give you some sort of mild explainer there, businesses fund themselves or finance themselves by way of two means, right? Equity or debt, right? They could be obviously other more hybrid structures, but plainly putting it simply, equity or debt are like the instruments in which businesses, finance itself or finance its operations. I advise mostly on how we get our facilities and how we maintain those facilities, and essentially close those facilities within my team. On the commercial end, I advise on a large plethora of contracts, as well as, compliance as well with regulations across our markets globally as well. But with a certain specific focus on West Africa.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Chiedozie. I think that appears to be a lot of work that you do, and knowing how complex it is, it's really a lot. But then I think that stems up to the next question, which I want to ask, and it's practically a question that we young lawyers mostly, I think we want to get it right. It's basically asking you, what is the basic misconception young lawyers get wrong when they hear the term commercial lawyer or commercial legal practice or thereabouts?
I think when people hear commercial law, I think they just think it involves just contracts. And that itself it's not so accurate, right? Or just simply would I say advising businesses, and I use the word advising very loosely. As a commercial lawyer, your real value add is actually judgment, right? Especially when you are in the business, especially when you are in-house. And I'll try to explain this very neatly. Oftentimes, we're trained from law school to just produce a technical sound answer. So you know what the rule is, or you know what the issue is, you know what the rule of law is, you apply it and reach a conclusion, as the case may be. And when you're advising in certain areas, right, you're trained to sort of hedge your risk by saying it may not or it may not be. Those sort of like hedging in order to just minimize liability. But when you are in the business, right, you are, for all intents and purposes, right, and this is where good lawyers or good business lawyers, I guess, make that, distinguish themselves. You are as important as the CFO, the head of business, the head of management, whatever business stakeholder is. And that's because the only way to sort of, show that value is making sure you're not the person that is always hedging by, oh, I don't know if we can do it, but you're actually always bringing judgment. Or this is what in this particular issue, we should do, right? And you're bringing it from a legal standpoint. So I would say that requires some sort of retraining, because I also don't think that our current curriculum in law school / university sort of prepares young lawyers to sort of, provide judgment in that sense, especially when you're dealing with non-lawyers, right? And so most young lawyers actually would just think that when it comes to commercial lawyering, it is restricted to contracts. But much more important than contract is, skill sets like communication, legal judgments, like bringing your judgments, whatever, sets or facts of issues that arises for you.
Okay, that's beautiful. Thank you so much, Mr. Chiedozie. And I think you've really explained something which I think the Nigerian law school have to fill up the gap with. And it's actually then boiled down to the next question as to with regards to skill. One thing about lawyering is how good your skill is and how efficient and necessary your skill is. Now, talking about you being a lawyer, transitioning from in-house law firm roles into in-house practice and stuff like that, what can you say is the most crucial skill or the set of skill set that a young lawyer should have when he wants to do the type of job that you do?
Oh, that's interesting. I think what comes to mind will be context switching. If you're in-house, you're like, well, generally, I think like the business of lawyering is, like I used to tell my friends, is like a customer care role, and it's also like a fire service role, meaning you're in the business of putting out fires. You're also in the business of actually, like, providing legal services in a manner that, there's genuine care, there's genuine people are calling you for, the slightest things, right? So the same way when you're speaking to a proper, thoroughly trained customer care professional, you see there's some level of, patience, even when, you, the person who is calling, is probably angry about a thing. So that's how, being a lawyer is, right? You literally say fire service role / customer care role in my view, meaning essentially you're always in the business of serving people. And what that means is that there'll be a lot of like context switching. And by context switching, I mean, if you're in-house, you get like, oh, we need to get this contract signed. and in the afternoon we're like, oh, we need to ship this particular product, you know, or for me, it's like, oh, we're actually involved in this transaction and then we need to close this transaction. So you need to be able to understand, like have the ability to navigate moving different silos or different buckets of things, right? So, you know, moving your mind from one thing to the other, and still being able to provide value. It's a very hard, you know, skill to demonstrate, but it's something that I guess one has to learn and build reps in, you know, either by trying your hands at across different things, you know, while you're coming up in your first year, second year, you know, just being um agnostic in terms of like what your interests are, and then open-minded to actually learning, you know, new skills, learning new practice areas. It sort of helps to you know, build reps. I think another thing is for new or young lawyers in terms of skill sets would be risk identification. Like the difference between working in-house and working as a private practice lawyer, right? And I say this having done both, is for a private practice lawyer, the client comes to you and then instructs you and says, oh, we need to do X, Y, Z, and we advise us on this. Sometimes, and this is how I guess properly, you know, thorough in-house professionals will distinguish themselves, is you you may not have a situation whereby the client is coming to you, and by the client I mean your business stakeholders in the business. You then need to be, you know, in the room to understand what the business is building, and then surface what the legal issues before they arise, because the businessmen may not even understand what those legal issues are, right? So you then need to develop that skill of risk identification, which by training you sort of should have had, right? You spent years doing issues, rule of law application, conclusion. So you should be, as a person, like if in every given set of facts or given set of business models or products being shipped, you should have learned or cultivated the ability to identify risk. So that's something that I would say it's a very critical skill as well. The third point is as ties to the point I made when I was describing the nature of lawyers, and that's why I would say I think there are 2 points in one, which is commercial curiosity and commercial empathy. Curiosity essentially by you need to be interested in business. You need to be fluent in the business. You need to understand business almost in a very similar way that a business stakeholder understands the business. Else the contract you're even preparing or reviewing will be almost, you'll find that you're always clashing heads with your business stakeholders, because it's like they're like, oh, this guy doesn't get it. And then you are seen as a cost center. You're seen as, you know, someone that is detracting from value rather than adding value. But if you understand the business, right, even before the business stakeholder surfaces risk or surfaces things, you're like, oh, okay, because this is how our customer care operations work. We can't have this. We can't have this. And then you command the respect of the business stakeholders, right? And that's where curiosity, commercial curiosity, and commercial empathy comes in. Empathy ties to the point where I was talking about how we're like customer care professionals in some sense, because you're serving clients, right? And of course, it goes without saying that you need to exercise your legal skills to utmost benefits for your clients. I hope this was able to sort of answer the question.
Yes, I think it answered the question. Thank you so much for this. I really, really appreciate it. Now, I think what I'll do now is the answer you gave was quite exhaustive, and I think it identified most of the core issues we need to talk about with regards to commercial practice. However, yeah. I don't know how we can maybe try to humanize this and then try to maybe answer use maybe personal experiences or something like that. Like, okay, for instance, like one of the most crucial skill that has stand out for you while you were doing commercial work, just to try to relate it to some of the people in this call, because of course it is not just lawyers that are here. Most people are also law students and they're about to get, and they will need something to humanize the complexities of legal practice. So in a nutshell, what I'm asking is this: how or what is the most crucial skill that has stand out for you in your practice? And then how can you maybe humanize this for us so that we can understand it better?
I think I'll start with the ability to context switch, and then maybe now going to risk identification, and then commercial curiosity or commercial empathy. Or perhaps I'll start from the bottom three. So let me start with commercial curiosity, right? Again, like I explained, commercial curiosity implies that you're interested in the business. You're interested in what the business does. You understand the business. And by understanding the business means sometimes you can actually read a P&L. You can actually read a balance sheet. My company was launching a product, was going to launch a product sometime last year in Ghana. And we had a situation where we couldn't, in quote and unquote, launch that particular product because the Bank of Ghana, which is like the equivalent to Central Bank of Nigeria here, had released certain guidelines that prohibited, foreigners from owning, shares up until a certain threshold in the relevant sector we're looking to actually invest in and launch that particular product in. Now, because I understood, first of all, the business, and so the first issue was they had gone up onto building the product, right? And even almost launching the service. But because again, I was embedded in the business by regular, communication with my business stakeholders, I was able to say, hey guys, look, there's this particular guidelines, right? We can't launch at XY dates. And now to give you context, right? There are builds, of course, when business stakeholders build, launching dates, there are models as to, okay, we expect to sell this within this time. So all of that was done. But then because I was privy to this, and the way I got privy to that was simply because I kept on, I have frequent touch points with the stakeholders that I work with. So what are you guys doing now? What is the product we're looking to launch? And when that came to my knowledge, I was like, hey guys, we can't launch this because of the presence of these guidelines. So two skills there, which was one, commercial curiosity, two, risk identification, because then I identified the risk. If we actually go on to launch it, we'll be in contravention of the laws of Ghana at the time. And then thirdly, which is the most important skill set, or rather why you're hired as a lawyer, is to, okay, now given this set of facts, how do we then mitigate this? How do we then find a way to have this local content ownership that the Bank of Ghana required? And we were not looking to actually have a local partner. So what I proposed to my stakeholders, and which we eventually did, was let's go get let's enter into a trust with a law firm at the time that holds shares on behalf of or rather for the benefit of our local employees in Ghana. And we went to the Bank of Ghana with that, and the Bank of Ghana approved that. So in terms of I guess humanizing what the skill set looks like, so we've covered, first of all, was the curiosity, because one thing that could happen, I see this happen as well in law firms and even in-house, people are always waiting for work to come for you. They're waiting for you to be staffed on one deal or not. Or if you're in-house, you're waiting for them to look legal in. That lack of curiosity and lack of initiative, right, would show and in how you're even generally viewed, whether it's in a law firm or in-house, by the company or by the law firms or the partners, right? So because I took the steps to ask these questions, right, I was able to advise the business and we're able to actually ship properly. So I hope this sort of gives context. Then I think the first one I talked about was context switching. I think I tried to give some sort of realistic, that's my day-to-day. I could wake up in the morning and there's contracts to review, or about 5 contracts to review, almost standard. And then in the afternoon, something's happened, maybe in South Africa, maybe there's a consumer complaint, or maybe there's a new regulatory points we need to deal with. So I have to context switch from the contracts, this, and then that's where you have to now learn how to prioritize, because it's okay, you're not just context switching, you have to solve problems. So, okay, what do I put first so that this, so I guess this gives you some sort of, would I say, picture into how some of the skill sets are critical and how you can actually develop and exercise them.
Okay, thank you so much. I think this really, really humanized everything, and it's quite clear now. You get so the next question would be on commercial awareness. Litigation lawyers, mostly lawyers who go to court and court practice and thereabout, they have one consistent tool that has spanned over the ages, is that if you want to be an outstanding lawyer, you need to read a lot of law reports, court judgments, or legislation and thereabouts again. So that, in a sense, is quote unquote commercial awareness for them, you get. But then when you talk to commercial lawyers, they're almost always telling you commercial awareness, commercial awareness. My question is, how do I build commercial awareness?
That's a very interesting question. And that's an interesting question because I think it is usually said and thrown out, right? So much so that people don't appreciate what it is or what that, implies, and people take it for granted. But I think it's at the bedrock of any serious development any young commercial lawyer wants to actually have for himself, from a professional standpoint. And how do you build it? It follows from the points, the skill set I talked about, which is commercial curiosity. Um, if you're curious, you seek for knowledge and then you become aware. It's really this, in quote and unquote, simple, right? If you're curious enough about whatever field you're in, whatever practice area you're in, you seek for that information and then you actually become aware. So how do you do that? From uni, I think I've always been, in quote and unquote, I've always strived to be commercially aware. I think in uni, I set up a tax club at the time because my interest at the time were tax and commercial law. And that sort of helped me gain perspective into how businesses function, how taxes, function, not just in a fiscal policy space, but also for companies as well. I also read a lot in terms of business press. You're not just reading legal law reports. I think as a commercial lawyer, I think it's important to read law reports because you sort of, especially because there's actually a specific commercial law report, I think CLWLR, I'm not sure if they still publish that, but it's also good for you to read those if you can, because you then get to see how even, the law intersects with commerce, right? And various aspects of commercial law, such as contracts, to an extent, tort law, company law, insolvency, bankruptcy, financial law, etc., relate, right? So read widely. Another thing I did, and I've said this to some of the mentees that I've had across the line, is one thing I usually do with places that I either wanted to work or things I wanted to do was I literally just go to their website and then literally read the biographies of literally not the bio, but the bios of like everyone that I can actually get a hang on that works in that particular company or firm. I also get acquainted with the deals they've done, right? So you're reading up the deals they've announced, and you're asking yourself question, what does this mean? And honestly, there's no excuse right now for anyone who is interested in professional development to not be aware. Why? Like, there's YouTube, there's ChatGPT, there's Claude. So before, you could face the mental block of, oh, I don't understand these concepts. They are too esoteric for me. They are too big for me. Like I don't seem to understand how they mean. But now with Claude or ChatGPT, you can literally tell it to explain this concept to me like I'm 5. So the only way to build commercial awareness is by being commercially curious. That's something no one can do for you. But if you're curious enough, you ask questions, right? And as you ask questions and you get answers, the better your questions become. And the better a lawyer you would be. I remember when I started out at a law firm called Detail Commercial Solicitors, which at the time I started out used to be one of the boutique commercial law firms. So I think most of my, for disclosure, most of my career has been business advisory, commercial law advisory, more specifically finance, debt finance related. And I remember some of the questions we were asked even while at the interview stage was as to how do you finance a company? And I remember speaking about it earlier in this session, right? And while I was talking about it, my mind went back to that first interview stage where I was asked that question and I answered debt and equity. And the only way I knew was because I read, or I asked, I was curious, to go to YouTube. So you need to be curious. When you see law firms that you like, and I'm not just talking about Nigerian law firms, I like to believe that anybody who's made our time to come to this, engagements that hosted by your team is very intentional about professional development. So you want to also extrapolate into the future by looking at, maybe future law firms, international law firms, or companies you like to work with. What are they doing? And get curious. If someone says trade finance, you're like, oh, what's trade finance? And then you go, you check YouTube, you check the relevant counterparties that are probably involved in the deal, you read up about them. The beautiful thing about knowledge is that it expands and it compounds. So even when you think, oh, this information is not useful, it's not necessary, you'll be quite surprised how over time, like you actually become much more knowledgeable and much more commercially aware. I hope that sort of like sheds more light into that. Like it gives practical insights and actually gets in, that skill set, because it's a very important one for young lawyers to develop.
Okay, that's quite beautiful. Thank you so much, Mr. Chiedozie. And I think that gives context to the question. Now, I think I'll have to bring you to the courtroom a bit. I am quite more conversant with what happens in the courtroom. And then when you go to the courtroom, you tend to discover that there are two types of lawyers. Now, there's a lawyer that is consistently asking for costs just in case the other counsel on the other side made a mistake, let's say delay in filing processes or extension of time or thereabouts to get. So it's always asking the cost for cost and thereabouts just to get extra money from the other client. But then there are the lawyers that are mostly the commercial ones. They don't want any form of those delay and stuff. So they will mostly try to aid the other lawyer just to make sure that the court gets to hear their case very fast and stuff like that. Now, I said that to say this. Most times they talk about, okay, commercial lawyers thinking as business partners or thereabout. So in practical terms, what does it mean for commercial lawyers to think as business partners, to know how to put the business first or how to link lawyering with business?
Okay. I thought you were going to ask me a litigation question. I was going to opt out, but I think I understand where the question leads. And I think I've touched this, right? If I hear your question, essentially is, how do you think like a business lawyer?
Yeah, how
right?
do you think like a business partner?
So, and I touched about this when I was talking about like you need to be fluent in the business. There are things that you also sort of touched, the opposite of the skill set by talking about litigation lawyer, and how they're just asking for cost and some of those things that could essentially prolong the litigation. If someone comes to you and you're like, oh, we need to launch this product in, let's say, Togo. We need to launch it next quarter. And then your instinct is, oh, well, we can't launch it next quarter because this, right? And, it is legally complicated to do so. You've not solved any problem. You've not done anything. You've just simply surfaced a problem. But when you go the extra steps to say, okay, cool, okay, this is how we're going to launch this particular product. These are 3 things we need to do in order to be able to launch it, at that time. Or if we can't launch it at that time, we may be looking at, say, about a 2 months extra lead time, right? So I would say, first of all, like I said, right, you need to understand that what you bring to the business is judgment, right? Because business people are solution oriented. So you're bringing judgment. They're always thinking, how do we move this business? And you always have to be the lawyer that moves the business, not a blocker. I find that, and this also sort of happens in me as well, in my preliminary months as an in-house lawyer, I find that a lot of stakeholders or people just see legal as a blocker, or as, oh, we need to launch it, we need to do this, and oh, legal has to. But you need to reframe your mind to find ways to actually be a business enabler. And it's a whole skill set, and it's a whole reimagining of what you are as a lawyer. It's hard and it's tough because we've been trained to sort of, first of all, is that I always say, I think I tweeted this sometime, as to actually be a good business lawyer, you must actually get over being a lawyer. I don't know how to explain it, right? You must get over the fact that you're a lawyer. And this is more important if you're in-house. Because of the training that we've had, right? 5 years, plus 1 year in law school, you're trained to feel like in a room with other skilled people, you're probably the most intelligent, or like you're the arbiter and go-to for solutions. But the truth is, in the real commercial world, that's not the case. the business stakeholder is probably as good, especially now with AI, where people can actually literally put in, instruments, regulations, and then see what it says for themselves, right? The truth is, most very skilled and very smart businessmen are probably almost as smart as you are. The only thing they don't have, if you're a good lawyer, is legal judgment and the ability to literally pristinely identify, not just, well, I wouldn't say identify risk because really most smart people can't do that, but provide legal judgment by literally synthesizing and doing the legal analysis yourself. So if you understand that, right, you understand that what you need to be doing in a business circle and actually on deals is, how am I moving this forward, right? How am I getting this forward? You shouldn't be the one blocking the business, holding things back, saying, oh, we can't do this. Oh, no, we can't. No, it's like, okay, we need to do this. How do we do this? And these are the things we need to unblock before we can actually do this. Saying it down sounds very literal, but this reframing of mindsets, right, is a very tough one, but it's a very important one to do. Like I said, I think the hack, and I kept on repeating this to myself, is that to actually be a good business or deal lawyer, you must get over being a lawyer and actually just say, you know what, these businessmen in the room are here to move this deal forward, right? I need to move this deal forward, right? You don't want a situation where, oh, why haven't we launched this product? Oh, legal is reviewing. Why haven't we? Oh, legal is, oh, the lawyer. No, like there's that whole reframing has to be done, for you to actually be a proper business partner.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Chiedozie. And I think that answered my question. So I'll be asking you two questions, although they'll be joined as one. The first is, I'm a young lawyer, or I'm a student. I'm about to get into legal profession and stuff like that. And then before I even get in-house role, how do I position myself as a commercial lawyer to get in-house role? That's one. And then two, if you were supposed to go back in time, and then let's say maybe you get your law school result and then you're about to be called to the bar and stuff like that, what would you have done differently?
Sorry, could you take those again?
Okay, the first question is it's generally the same question, although I'll try to build it in two contexts. The first context is with regards to a young lawyer. I'm getting called to the bar. I'm getting called to the bar. I want to start positioning myself as a young lawyer and stuff like that. And then I don't want to go into the conventional legal practice. I want to get into in-house roles. You get, and getting in-house role, I need to position myself in that part. In that part, how do I, as a young lawyer, position myself to get in-house role or position myself as a commercial lawyer? And then secondly, if you were supposed to go back in time, let's say you just get your law school result and you're about to be called to the Nigerian bar, what would you have done differently?
I think I'm struggling with the second question because it's like, what would I have done differently in order to do what?
What would you have done differently in order to reach where you are today? That's your current milestone.
Okay. I think let me take this first question because I'm still struggling with the second question. Because in my mind, I'm like, if I'd done anything differently, I wouldn't be where I am, right? So I guess that's why I'm struggling with it. But I think I'll take with positioning yourself as a commercial lawyer and what to do before you get in-house roles. And I'll not just share my experience. I'll also share the experience of my friends as well, who I know have proceeded from law firms into in-house as well. For my journey, again, like I said, I started, a detailed commercial solicitors, which essentially was is an exclusively commercial law firm. I had some other options at the time, but I had, quote unquote, certain mentors, one who is with the African Development Bank now, and another one who is a general counsel at a private equity firm called Renew Capital. They were both partners at the time. So, and they had, their background was finance, and I think I wanted that at the time, right? I wanted that specialization, finance and tax. One of them as well, had that combo or combination. So that sort of, and of course, generally they were paying well at that time. I'm not sure what it is now, but at that time, comparatively, was top 5 paying firms for NYC students, or rather law professionals at that time. So it sort of calibrated what my career journey was going to look like, because I was thrown in And that's the thing working there, is that you're sort of thrown in at from the day one. So I was writing newsletters. We were working on deals, top financing deals at the time. And I started developing, I wouldn't say I started developing, because I think I'd already started developing commercial awareness and just being a commercial lawyer pre that, because again, while in school, I'd interned, in top law firms. I'd also worked shortly before that for about 4 months in Anderson. Anderson is a tax/regulatory firm as well. So I had gotten some sort of sense of, what it looks like to actually advise businesses. So I would say for you to actually position yourself as a commercial lawyer and sort of like get an in-house role, I think you should just focus first on actually being, if you are in a law firm, being a good deal lawyer, being a good deal, commercial lawyer in that particular law firm, right? So understanding investments, understanding financing, understanding private equity, understanding the subject area in which you actually advise in power, gas, like energy, whatever sector you're actually advising in, you need to be very good in it. And you need to understand the second part, and this is the point most people ignore. Sometimes, because law firm work can get very, in quote unquote, monotonous. I don't think it is actually, because I feel like the beautiful thing about law firms is that you have different clients coming to you about, almost the same practice matter, but there are different nuances because they're different businesses. So in some sense, it's not monotonous. So, but you need to go the extra step to understanding their business. So you need to just move beyond, oh yes, we need to close this deal, prepare all assets, debenture, review the facility agreements, or maybe for first year lawyers, and what you're just doing is due diligence, to understanding the business. Why does this business need this money? What are they trying to do with this money or working capital? Okay, what could it potentially help them do? And then, why are they trying to close within this time? And then oftentimes if you pay attention to due diligence, I feel like you're doing yourself a very, very big service, because due diligence is like surgery. You're picking up a company and you're anatomically, dissecting the company and seeing everything as it is, their material contracts, their litigation, their financial statements, right? And then you're starting to understand, what the business, where the business is, and what this business is likely taking financing to do for the business. So, and this is, again, like I said, I'm speaking from my experience. There are a couple of my friends who developed early expertise in private equity, some in energy, who are in oil and gas firms now, and in private equity. And the simple way they did that as well was just staying consistent within that practice area, writing lots of newsletters. I wrote lots of newsletters. Whenever I worked on a deal and I found something interesting, I would take the initiative of writing a newsletter. I like to believe that that's the way it still works. Like, young lawyers are still very interested in actually publishing newsletters within their law firms without waiting for the law firms to actually reach out to them to say, oh, let's do this. Because it works, it does two things, right? First of all, it builds your visibility externally. So when there's a newsletter and then they see your name, your partner's name, first of all, your name is there. So that's a good thing. Second thing is that within your company, or your firm, you're actually seen as someone that actually brings value. So, it's a zero-sum easy win, I like to think, for anyone who is serious enough. So publish those notes, publish those commentary, publish this analysis, engage on LinkedIn with, relevant career content that, and intelligence observations from mentors that you also look up to. It would also be a way that I would say you can actually position yourself as well. I remember when I got the company I currently work for, I didn't just jump into any in-house role, right? I specifically wanted an in-house role that would continue my career path, if that sort of makes sense. So I've done financing, I've done commercial law. So I was like, you know what, I want to be, if I'm going in-house, obviously the consideration at the time, there were other considerations, which, like I think I've said, I think it was in a recent webinar with MBA young lawyers, where I said, you need to get to a point where when you're designing a career, there are a lot of things you now start to look at, right? So as for me, there were other things at that point that started to make sense and why I left, law firms, right? So, but the point I was trying to make here is when you're making moves, right, you need to think about how do I make a move that continues my career? Because careers compound. Time shows in a career, the effect of time. So if you're doing something consistently over a period of time, you realize that you're able to command more and you're able to you become a specialist. It's just what it is. So it's important to, I guess, make your switches early and then put in the grind and actually, um, 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 do the work that is required from you. So I hope this was able to sort of clarify that question on what things you're supposed to do. So I'll just take it back again. Be interested in whatever practice area you're doing, could you find yourself currently. Like the Bible says, see who find who finds whatever he's doing with your hands. Like, you stand not for mean men but kings, right? Essentially be diligent at it. Understand the client's business, and publish as frequently as you can and read as frequently as you can.
Okay, thank you so much for that. I think I would take it from the place where you mentioned that career compounds. It's quite essential that we put in the work for career. Now, the thing is, I want to ask a question that most young lawyers ask, or most young professionals always ask. What would you advise? I want to hear your thoughts on whether you think we should specialize early or you think get broad experience first and then get to specialize later.
It's a very interesting question, right? When I'm asked this question, right? So I would say I think that, and again, early is sort of contextual, right? But I would say if you know you want to be a commercial lawyer, right? And I'm being very careful and curious here because there are two sides to this. There are a couple of people who say, oh, their litigation experience and background helped them become a better commercial lawyer, right? But then I guess it makes no sense if you know ultimately what you want to be is a commercial lawyer advising businesses from a purely commercial angle and not dispute angle to spend, say, 5-6 years doing litigation, right? If you can help it. I do understand that there are certain situations whereby you can't help it, either because you're stuck in a role where you just have to keep doing it, right? Of course, to make ends meet or to just keep surviving. But if you can help it, I like to think that you should be able to specialize, or you should actually specialize early. There's a period in your first 3 to 5 years where debt compounds faster than breath. So, if you specialize in your first 3 to 5 years, you're learning, you're developing the right instinct. And I say instincts because sometimes the skills you require to actually be a good lawyer are not necessarily textbook skills. It's just instinct. And instinct comes from rote memory, meaning doing the same thing over and over again over a period of time, if that sort of makes sense. So when you're able to compound that within like a shorter time frame, like it puts you on a certain leverage and pedestal that someone else who hasn't gotten that particular root memory done. I've seen senior lawyers, and rather, because of my career, I've seen quote and unquote senior lawyers that on financing deals, you can tell that they just don't know anything because again, they haven't done it, or they haven't done it as much, so they don't know a lot of nuances that could exist within a particular transaction. And then they do this thing where which may not necessarily a bad thing, it's just a trained eye can always, a trained ear can always spot it, where they import, let's say, the nuances of maybe litigation or maybe another practice areas into. And so I would say if you can help it, specialize early, but stay curious, stay generally curious.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Chiedozie.
But if I can add to that though, and I say this having been in the benefit of also being in a business that's also expansive and requires me to do a lot of context, would be what I would say you should specialize early. You have to ensure that your specialization is not a cage. right? It's not what is holding you back from then getting new knowledge, right? It should be a lens, not a cage, right? So you have deep expertise, but you should be able to, have adjacent knowledge on certain things, right? That way you can always allow your knowledge sort of cross-pollinate.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. And I think it actually brought clarity to the question. So the next question will be with regards to AI and technology, knowing the fact that AI is changing the law, the world is changing due to technology and stuff like that. What will you advise young lawyers, especially in the place of commercial legal practice? How can they stay in terms with AI and AI technology and how to stay commercially relevant in spite of all these tools and skills?
So I'll share my personal story. I remember when I started using ChatGPT. I started using ChatGPT very early. I think as early as I discovered it, actually. Um, Not necessarily to use it at my work, but to just interact with it because again, I'm a curious person. And then I remember then they were like, "Oh yeah, AI will replace lawyers." And I was like, "This thing cannot replace me. It's not possible now." With all the jargons it was bringing, this was maybe 2023 or two, three, I think it was bringing at the time. I was like, "Yeah, this cannot be what will replace lawyers, right?" Fast forward to 2024, OpenAI released certain models that became better than those ones, and then I was seeing it do certain things like it could help with things like letters, like very, or you want to like reframe certain, just essentially very light revisions, right? But nothing that you could trust, the models with. Fast forward to last year, right, and this year, we've seen artificial intelligence, progress to a place where I recently said, in my opinion, most LLM models can replace and this is a very controversial take, and I really don't want to be quoted anywhere, but I think it could replace most first-year lawyers. And I say most, not all. I say this because oftentimes an average of first-year lawyers still, yes, you still mechanical in your approach to law. It's like, oh, garbage in, garbage out, which is essentially what LLMs are. If you feed a good LLM, and I mean AI, like a good model with, a good precedent, it's able to sort of give you something to work with. As a matter of fact, my company, we use AI in our work. It is mandated that we use AI in our work. Most law firms, most international law firms now use AI in their work, and that's why you're seeing a lot of firms are not hiring as much, because a couple of routes work that we used to think would I say mundane, AI is able to do it now. And I worry sometimes for young lawyers that are starting out, because those were work that I see it as rep work. It's like when you go to the gym, right? And they tell you, oh, you can't carry 20 kg, start from 5 or 2. Now AI is able to do those 2 kg, 5 kg work in a way that senior lawyers can then take these materials and work with. So as a young lawyer, not knowing how to do AI, first of all, using AI is first of all killing yourself, because this is something that's in direct competition almost with you. So it's like you not knowing how to use it is doing yourself a big disservice. I have Claude, I have Gemini, I have ChatGPT. Like every month, I don't mind spending on these things, because I feel like the more you interact and engage with them, the more you're able to understand how to even prompt it better. It's come to stay with us. It will be indispensable in our professional lives. It's like when, I don't know what I'm about to say, and I'm going to sound very old, but I promise you I'm not that old. When I was young, we used to have there was this subject called bookkeeping. I don't know if people still do it. I don't know if that's something people still do, right? Because again, you have Excel, you had tools that phased out that particular subject, right? And so that's how it is with artificial intelligence. There are a lot of things that, AI would be able to do, but there's one thing AI would not be able to do. And we've seen this very recently. There was this recent law case this week, or was it last week? It was very scandalous. I think a top US law firm had submitted case briefings to a US court, and then he had hallucinations of AI citations in the brief. And coincidentally, I was giving a in my legal meeting last week, I was sharing with my colleagues that hallucination is not something that will get better as models improve. It might marginally get better, but if you understand how AI works or how LLMs work, it's a feature. It's not a bug, because LLMs work as a matter of statistical probability, right? I don't want to go into the intricacies of that, but essentially, what LLMs do is predictability. So A plus B equals C. So you'd always have those hallucinations, because where, for instance, it doesn't have the right answers, because they are trained to be helpful, it's going to make up answers for you. So if you've not trained yourself to be a good lawyer, you don't even know when the AI is lying to you. And then you take that particular output and give it to either your client or your manager, and then you put the entire firm, just like the US law firm, in trouble, or the client's business in trouble. So what I would say is young lawyers would have to learn how to use the tools, but you must not let it replace your thinking. In fact, I was telling one of my friends that there is now a high premium on critical thinking, because the lazy way out is to let AI do everything. But now, if you are a curious person and you're a critical thinker, you would always fact check whatever AI gives you. And fact checking means, as lawyers, you have to check the primary sources, basic legal methods, basic legal system. Their primary sources, their secondary sources. AI is not even a source. So if AI gives you anything, you need to go back and then go back to the primary source, whether it's the law reports, whether it's the case law, whether it's the statutory authority, or the legal authority or person who said this thing. Like, you need to do that analysis whenever AI is giving you a product, right? That's the only way your work output will be defensible. Remember, no client or manager is hiring the AI, they're hiring you. And as human beings, right, would always like to scapegoat somebody. We cannot scapegoat the AI. It is you who has given the output that would say, "Oh, come, what are you doing?" So your integrity, your reputation is at stake. So I would say young lawyers must engage with AI. See, because gone are the days now where, say, someone gives you work and expects you to turn it in 3 days. People want it that same day. And if you can't give me that day, when I know if I put it in an LLM, I will get the output. I'm wondering what I'm doing with you or what you're doing for me. So when you understand that concept, right, you don't want a computer to replace you. You want to be useful wherever you are. You would engage with the tool as aggressive as you can, but do not let it replace your critical thinking. And that's a very important point. I can't even overstate or overflog this point a lot. And the only way to do it is if you now read more AI output than you read more books, and you read more articles, and you read more opinions, right? I remember one of the things I did when I started working was I just randomly reading opinions that in the soft library of detail at the time, like all the things they had worked on in the past, the DDs. I'll just read it, right? So if you don't have that, right, you can't even prompt the AI well. So, and you can't even know when the AI is hallucinating, because you've not developed what we call professional taste. There's a certain professional taste that professionals develop over time, right? So if you don't do the hard work, you can't even develop that taste. You start relying on AI to think, to do everything. I'm not sure how you make it though. NGMI.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Mr. Chiedozie. I think that was quite excellent and brilliant. Thank you so much for it. And my next question is quite direct and short. It's simple. What is that one mindset shift that you think that a young lawyer can imbibe that will change significantly how they approach their work? I don't know if I can take it again. The mindset shift that a young lawyer can adopt to help them strategically change how they approach their work.
So it's a very brilliant question. And what I'm going to say, I still struggle with it, right? Because we are all humans, but it's important. There are a couple of layers to it, but in summary, treat everything you're doing like it's yours. Like, whatever it is that you're doing, just treat it like it's your law firm, it's your transaction, it's your business. And well, this is fact, because to be honest, sometimes there are some of us that you probably don't take a lot of things to heart. You probably treat everything in your life lightly, so it may not necessarily be a hack. So the second leg is to treat it knowing that everything depends on it. So I think that's the mindset shift. It could be, it's like this popular axiom that says, if you're sweeping streets, like sweep streets like Leonardo da Vinci would, or paint, like if you're painting, paint like Leonardo da Vinci would, like whatever it is you're doing, just do it up to the best of your ability and your capability. Because by that you just start to learn how to do things in to what is your most perfect way, or your most perfect ambition, if that sort of makes sense. And I say this because it's relative. There's Esther on the call. I could give Esther, say, a memo to review, and I give, so let's say, Aziz or Abdullah the same memo. But because people are different, right? Abdullah would probably put in his best, but it's not as good as Esther's best. Whichever way it is, right? You want to be able to leave that room knowing that, oh, as Abdullah, I put in my best into this. Like, I can't be found wanting, like, okay, in my heart and in my conscience that my best is not going to this. It's hard, and you may not be able to do this every time. But if you're able to learn this as your average performance bar, it has a huge multiplier effect on your career, because you just want to always do things well. My friends that I have seen do this and exemplify this are all in very amazing places, right? I learned how to even do this late because, to be honest, I mean, I always just felt while coming up that, yeah, I'll get it done. I mean, at the time, my mentality was always, I will get it done. No worry, we'll go run them last, right? And we always did run it, right? But when you come up and as you grow up as a professional, as a business person, running it last is not the bar. That's not the standard. You must run it first and best, actually. So when you're in your young career phase, right? And if I'm speaking to, I guess, if there are young lawyers on the call, it's a very excellent phase to be, because I joke with my friends that nobody sees me now and says, oh, this guy has potential. Oh, this guy can, those days are slowly being gone, right? But when you're young, you judge for your potential, and that's amazing, because people can forgive your mistakes and your errors more. So if you learn in that point in time where people are even much more forgiving of your mistakes to put in your best, when your best is eventually demanded, you've already developed like a high bar.
Okay, that's beautiful. Thank you so much. And I think that speaks deeply to us as young lawyers and to aspirants to the Nigerian bar. Then the next question, and I think that's going to be the final question for this session, is with regards to positioning. I know we've spoken about positioning yourself for in-house role and stuff like that. And then but then, Mr. Chiedozie, you're a cross-border lawyer, one who practices at an international level. How do you think, as a young cross-border positions?
So I think the Nigerian network was doing its thing, so I couldn't hear you properly.
I said, as a young lawyer, if I want to become like you, to position myself for cross-border role and for multi-jurisdictional practice, how can I position myself?
Okay, that sounds flattering, but I guess to be would I say cross-border lawyer working across countries, I think first, right, is to, like I said, we've talked about this. Like you said, we've talked about this. Is to go back to the basics, do whatever you're doing very well. First of all, secondly, is to always have, well, in my opinion, I've always wanted to have like an international mindset to the work that I do, and it's governed the choices that I make professionally. it was the reason I guess I didn't do litigation, even though I thought I could be good at it, because I'm like, litigation is sort of restricted to territory, right? So law, generally speaking, is restricted, to jurisdictions. But litigation even more so. But commercial lawyering, deal lawyering typically cuts across borders. Essentially, if you even think about how we raise money in Nigeria, we raise money from people in the West bringing money into Nigeria. So I'd always wanted to, again, this comes against to sort of like mapping out what your career would look like. I've always wanted to see that a place where that follows the money, maybe it's the Igbo man in me, and not have to be, not have to be, would I say, constrained by jurisdiction, right? If that makes sense, especially because at the time the world was opening up, and I could also see lawyers as well that were able to, work across border and do cross border work. And financing is one of those places that finance PE is one of those places, well, one of those practice areas that affords you that sort of would I say ability or practice ability to make your skills transferable. Because a facility agreement in Nigeria, especially when it's governed by English law, which most times most facility agreements are, is almost the same thing with what a facility agreement in Ghana, South Africa, United Kingdom would look like, right? So when you're working across jurisdictions, you're not having to start cracking your head, oh, what is this? There might be certain nuances, obviously. There could be certain mechanisms that, that are different across jurisdictions as well. But those are now nuances, right? They are not necessarily the overall. You would understand what the financing is. If someone tells you, okay, those big English you see, like, 100 million syndicated facility, borrowing-based facility, you understand what it is, right? Because again, a borrowing-based facility in Nigeria is a borrowing-based facility in United Kingdom, is a borrowing-based facility in South Africa. The underlying concepts are, uniform. So I guess that sort of informed, I guess, my practice areas choice. So I'd say if you're trying to do that, right, there are a lot of practice areas. I'm speaking from mine because that's my experience. There's data protection, there's private equity, there's M&A. There are so many practice areas within the commercial law sphere that allows you to actually be a corporate, like even contracts. Contracts are contracts. There are nuances, obviously, within jurisdictions, but indemnity is often indemnity. Termination is termination. Is usually almost the same nuance, right? So I guess if you want to do work that is across border, commercial law gives you that good sphere, that good base to then project yourself.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Chiedozie. I think I'll hand over now to Lois.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Oh, thank you very much, Chiedozie, for being here today and taking the time to explain. Like, it's been a really insightful session, even for me that is already trying to build a career. Like, so many things you said stood out for me, especially when you mentioned in order to be a great lawyer, commercial or business lawyer, you need to step out of thinking strictly as a lawyer. That really stood out for me, and I'm sure a lot of people have gained so much from this session. So I have a question for you. In the meantime, if you have questions, please, you can drop your questions in the comment section, in the chat box. Well, I would ask you this question. So in the event, we know that this commercial practice involves a lot of financial implication, and it's like there are real-time consequences for our actions as lawyers. So what happens in the event that, say, I make a mistake, I'm a young lawyer at work, I just probably got this job, I'm trying to build credibility and all, and then I make a very costly mistake that costs the business so much money, no matter how little. In that moment, I think I would feel like it's finished for me, it's over and all. So how do you advise that someone like the lawyer builds up from there and is able to gain credibility and not live in that mistake until they are eventually written off or asked to leave? How do you bounce back from an incident like that if it happens?
I think it's the only way to bounce back from incidents like that is just to keep doing good job, just as much as possible. As a person, and I'll give a very personal response to that. I tend not to focus on like well, I don't want to say I tend not to focus on mistakes, but I tend not to focus on incidents that have passed, like once it's done, because the only emotion you have left is, self-criticism, and that's not necessarily helpful. You should be able to take the lessons that you've learned there, and apply it to your work because you're a professional. And I feel like there's something about Nigeria that does not allow us to appreciate the meaning of what a professional is, because there's a general anyhowism. But if you think about it, right, that a doctor is a doctor, like a doctor has to make sure that, he's providing his best, both in terms of attention, skill sets to whatever patient, like, he's attending to. And he has to do this, I guess, for as long as he's a doctor. So if you make an error, I guess, hopefully it's not a very big error, which in civilized societies you'll be punished. For instance, in the United Kingdom, like, you will be punished. You could even in Nigeria, you could actually be disbarred for certain actions, and worst case, the clients can even bring an action of negligence against you. But you can't dwell in that, because being a professional means that you have to go again. I think the best example to use would be, and I think that comes very easy for us, would be athletes, like sports. If you lose last week, it does not mean you will not play again next week. You have to go again and play, and you have to actually put in your best self and actually aim to win the next match. So I think that would be the mentality to adopt, just having like an athlete's mindset, like, okay, this has happened, what are the lessons there, and then go again, because we're not foolproof, right? And we always have certain mistakes. I mean, what you want to do as a professional is to limit your margin of error. That's why you have to exercise, a good amount of care. But mistakes are bound to happen, and when they happen, you need to make sure that that affects your next transaction or your next contract. And people see that energy. People actually, you'll be surprised, see how you deal with loss or deal with a mistake, and your strength of character is shown in that moment, right? Personally, I had a very recent experience, even when I'd sort of miscalculated when a deal was supposed to close. By that I mean, like, well, not necessarily miscalculated. The company just needed the money sooner than we had actually anticipated they would need the money, and so there was a rush to close the deal, right? Which ideally, like, as a matter of standard, we try to make sure we don't have this rush, right? And we don't have the business people reaching out to us, say, oh, why haven't we closed, or why hasn't this money dropped? And I remember having to apologize to my boss. Hey, I'm sorry this happened. This wasn't, and then that moved on. Another deal closed, my boss was, enthusiastic, thanked me. I was like, oh yeah, well done for doing this. So imagine if I stayed in the slump of, I didn't deliver those CPs on time. Like, that can't be your, mentality. You need to develop like an athlete's mentality. It happened, take the win, and then take the lessons, and then go again.
Yeah, thank you so much. I like when you said to take the lessons and go again, because I'm asking from a personal experience where it happened to me in time past. I made a mistake, and for a while I was in that, I didn't want to move on from it, and it almost cost me another mistake, but thankfully I was able to pick up myself and move on from that. So thank you so much. We have two questions in the chat box. The first is from Kwam. He says, he's asking, should you start your career in an in-house role, or must it be a law firm, especially if you cannot secure a commercial law firm?
Sorry, can you take that again? Sorry.
So he's asking, should you start your career in an in-house role or must it be a law firm? Especially if you cannot secure a commercial law firm. You know, you said you started at
Yeah,
detailed commercial. So what if in the event that you're not able to secure a law firm such as detail, how do you move?
yeah. I think this is a question that sort of answers itself. My recommendation when I speak to younger lawyers and people that are fresh out from law school is that I usually encourage them to start out in a law firm. For me, I feel the variety of clients and the variety of matters you get to deal with um, helps, right? And goes a long way to shape how you appreciate even commercial law. Um, so it's my I always lean towards starting in a law firm, starting in a good law firm, not just a law firm, because sometimes there's certain in-house roles you have, and it's probably better than any law firm, not any, but like some law firms you have. So starting in a good law firm, if you can, a good commercial law firm will always be my preference. But if you cannot, right, the interesting thing about profession and about our career is that it's a very solo thing. Like it's a very self, it's a journey that is actually you have to lead yourself towards too. And sometimes it may not look like what it is for me or what it is for Louis or what it is for Fikayo. Like it would differ from person to person. And that's why you need to have your North Star, which is what would I like to be? A way that I try to do this and this is not always correct, and this is always something you can change. Is when I'm 40, what would I like to be doing? What would I like to do that I think would give me joy for work and life? And that's my personal philosophy. Like for me, that's how I like to go. I go into that, then I walk my way back and say, okay, um, what do I need to do that I feel like it will lead me to that part, by that time. And I feel like if you do this self audit, right, but especially putting your skill sets into like an honest assessment of your skill sets, like your strengths, your weakness, and then answer yourself, right, you'll be able to even make some of these decisions quite easy. Should I do this, law firm now, or should I do this in house? But my preference will always be do law firm, then do in house when afterwards if you want to, or you might not actually. Sometimes a law firm may be what is even compatible for you, right? In terms of your strengths and in terms of where you see yourself in a couple of years. So I'd say the question shouldn't be should I do law firm or should I do in-house? It should be what do I actually want to do for myself? Or how do I see myself? Where do I see myself, let's say in 10 years or in 5 years? And mind you, it can change. Like you can get started on that journey. You 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 open new portals of knowledge, right, by being on that journey, and you can recalibrate and say, okay, this is what I want to do, for the next 5 years. So I think while answering your question, I've sort of answered another question, which I think is a much more important question as to how do you find out what you want to do, right, for yourself.
Yes, thank you so much. You've answered his question. So the next question is from Esther Malu. She says, thank you so much, Mr. Dozier, for this meeting. My question is in respect of how commercial lawyers are risk identifiers. This has been an issue I observed in my line of work. Could you recommend trainings, YouTube channels, books, websites, or articles that could help in providing more information and knowledge on how to be better risk observers?
Okay, Esther, if you don't mind, can you just for me to answer this question very specifically, can you share how like you observe this in your line, in what ways it's manifested in your line of work?
Okay. Esther, please, can you unmute your mic?
Hello, good evening. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Good evening.
Yes, good evening. My name is Esther, and okay, I currently work with the public enterprise, Hello?
Sorry, I can barely hear you. Is it just me? Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. I said I currently work with Bureau of Public Enterprise, and I'm in a situation where we deal with different
Sorry,
niches.
you work in the Federal Republic Enterprise.
No,
Okay,
Bureau,
oh,
like Bureau
BPE.
check.
Okay, okay, Bureau of Public Enterprise. Okay, cool.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm in a situation where we deal with different niches. We deal with energy, oil and gas, natural resources, public-private partnerships, a whole lot of transactions at the same time. And I started there as a copper and I was retained contract and all of that. So from law school, the experience I have is charge, um, covenants, professional ethics. But getting there and dealing now with more of agreements, concessions, agreements with different companies of different spectrums. And one of the terms of reference in my job description is that I'm meant to identify risks in all these different transactions that are going on. So it has always been a burden to me because law school, university, I wasn't taught all of this. And now I'm faced with a situation where I'm meant to advise. Because I can remember when I started, if they tell me to write a memo, I'll just write the background, do the analysis the best that I can, but I'll not write anything in recommendation. And if my boss asks me, I'll tell her, "No, I don't have anything to say because they did not teach me anything like this. So I cannot give you what I don't have." So I've been reading, I've done a lot of reading on LinkedIn, online, in meetings. I try to pay attention to. That's why when you're talking about um, being like removing yourself from being a lawyer and trying to own the business, I resonated with that a lot because we reached a point where I had to now start trying to think like an engineer. When we're talking about energy transactions, I had to think like a coal miner when I was dealing with mining transactions, like all of that. So the question that was a body in my heart was, how do you get those knowledge? Where do you learn it from? You understand? I don't know whether you get what I'm saying. Where do
Yeah.
you learn it from? How do you learn it? Because even my bosses, they are not experts in this field. It's because of over time they have been dealing with this kind of transactions that they were able to get the knowledge. But me on my own, I've want to expand and also be able to bring meaningful contributions to the table because the people I'm also meeting, I'm not meeting small people. I'm meeting people that also know they're on top of their game. So I also want to be on top of my game. So I just want to know, how do you level up this struggle?
I think you're really like very close to your answers. You probably need some sort of affirmation, but I think your thinking is already right. You need to understand the relevant industry that you're practicing. And sometimes it actually even involves you being an engineer, not being in terms of having to go study engineering, but like actually researching on engineering. I'll give an example. When I was studying out, right, the firm I started working out is very big on power, like power and infrastructure or something we're very heavy on. Although I ran away from it to just do, but again, I was financing deals within that sector. So I had to learn things like offtake, throughput, all those sort of technical terms that were like, okay, what is this, right? In fact, I remember now that I think about it, the the oil and gas there was a new oil and gas act, I think the PIA, Petroleum Industrial Act, that came out that year. And one of my first tasks at that time was I was supposed to review the whole act and then prepare like a whole bulletin about the implications of the act. And I remember this because first of all, my supervisor within that practice area was extremely exacting. And I remember just being frustrated. Um, but I learned a lot from a value chain perspective about oil and gas, right? Um, that was beneficial for me. I mean, I no longer do oil and gas, but I'm saying I think that you're right in how you're thinking about it. Is that you must think about it is okay. how does an engineer speak to this particular contract? What are the terms and terminologies that they know? What are the very basics of this industry I'm supposed to advise in? And they know those basics. That's the only way, to be honest, you can able to bring certain value. And sometimes it requires a whole lot of reading and study, not necessarily of the law. You should obviously study the law, but of the industry, right? And then getting familiar with what those concepts are. The best oil and gas lawyers, I promise you, are people that can actually speak the business of oil and gas to business people. Because again, you're in the business of servicing clients that are, in that field, right? The only way you can trust your judgments is that, oh, when it comes to those things, you can actually you have the relevant business literacy and fluency to navigate it. So yes, I mean, YouTube, you've already literally answered the question by yourself. Like YouTube, reading widely on those specific industry areas where you're operating is the first to go to, in order to learn how to actually spot risk. As a lawyer, ideally, right, I would like to think that spotting risk shouldn't be a problem. Once you have this industry nuance and context. Why? Because sometimes what I would like, no matter how we criticize our law system, I think Iraq is a constant. Issues, rule of law, application and conclusion. Issues means you have to first of all spot the issues, right? And then you do the rule of law, then you apply, then you conclude. Learning how to spot issues is something you can develop over time, even if you've not developed it in school, by just being a critical thinker and asking the what, when, why, and how questions as possible. What is this? Why are we doing this? One of the most important things that changed how I see lawyering, or changed lawyering for me and made a fundamental distinction is one of the things my supervisor will always ask me every time I say a thing would be, what is the basis for this? You can't even come to him at that time with anything without having the basis for it. So if you say the sun is, the sun is yellow or whatever, what is the basis? Where have you gotten this information from? So I think that's the way to sort of, first of all, start to think about the information that you're working with, and you start to even build, a general risk appetite. And people think about risk like it's esoteric, but in a contract, like when you think about representations and warranties and covenants and conditions, those are essentially risk allocation mechanisms, right? There are ways in which we're trying to minimize the risk that will come out in a business transaction, right? So getting familiar with these things, like, oh, why is this representation there? Why is this warranty there? Right? Why is this covenant there? A covenant essentially is like, oh, I promise to do something on so and so date or on so and so time. That's a risk mechanism, because the reason why it's there is because if you don't do this, I'll lose money. So we need to put it in the contract, right? So risk essentially is literally thinking through how a lot of ways could go wrong, right? And so, but your business, and this is where it comes to recommendation that you highlighted. Your true value as a lawyer is not just to bring out and say risk, but then you must now be able to present the risk in a manner that you're not a deal blocker, like you can mitigate it, right? Your reputation as a good lawyer depends on your ability to resolve risk, and you cannot resolve it if you've not understood the industry you're working with or working in. I'll give an example. Let's say in a facility, right, and credit risk is the concern, right? Credit risk meaning, and by facility I mean somebody wants to borrow money and there's a risk of I don't know if this person will pay back, right? And as a lawyer, the next thing you'll be thinking about, so the risk is we don't know if this person will pay back or how this person will pay back. And if this person doesn't pay back, how will I get my money? So the risk is there's a credit risk. As a lawyer, the next thing you're thinking about is, okay, what assets can we get from this person that if we liquidate or if we sell, we will use it to get our money back, right? And obviously, the next question you should be thinking, and this is where critical thinking comes, is okay, how easy will it be for us to sort of liquidate these assets? So you're asking, and you're having these arguments with yourself in order to be able to be a good lawyer to that deal, right? You could also think, oh, the alternative here is, okay, if there's no assets here, can I get a third party that, let's say, is his friend, that will come and say, okay, fine, I'll give you this property if this person doesn't pay back. Those are all risk mitigation methods, right? So it's not esoteric. It's not something that's outside of what we already do in everyday life. In every day, as you exist as a human being, the risk is inherent of that, right? You're making decisions and you're thinking on how to mitigate it. So apply the same thing to whatever business you're advising. The only distinction then will now be that you've taken time to watch YouTube, read videos, do the articles to understand the business well. I hope I've answered the question, Esther, but happy to, I guess, speak for life. I haven't.
No, you did. You did. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Esther. Thank you, Chiedozie, for that. So is there any other question? If there's none, we would be wrapping up. If you have a question, you can raise your hand. You can indicate. Okay, so in the absence of any other question, we'd like to thank you so much, Chiedozie. This has been a very insightful session, and I have learned a lot. I'm sure everyone on this call has learned a lot. We're really grateful that you made time to come here and to, speak to us and also share your insights. We're very grateful. And also thank you to everyone that's been here, that's taken the time to